All right. Well, maybe the first thing we ought to talk about is the exam. You had an exam on Wednesday, and it's totally unfair, but I've graded some of the exams, and some of the exams I haven't graded yet. So my last name is W, which means I was always at the end of the list for everything growing up, you know. Last in the lunch line, last for school pictures, last for everything. And so those of you who are later in the alphabet are getting the same treatment on when your exam gets graded. You know, I really take my time when I'm scoring your tests. I don't want to rush through that. I really want to understand and give you all the points that you are entitled to. So I just want to let you know that I'll probably finish grading those over the weekend, and then we'll look at the solution together on Monday. And Aaron, that's funny about first names, absolutely. All right, so you know, some of you already know your score on the exam, some of you don't know your score. So I'll be doing those incrementally as I get the time. All right, so other announcements. On Monday, the annual worth assignment is due. Now that's a topic that we covered a good long time ago. And if I remember correctly, it's a pretty limited assignment. So, you know, hopefully you should be able to finalize that over the weekend. And then the other thing, I'm going to constantly remind you about the project. Even though there's lots of other things in between now and then, I'm going to continually refer to the project just to keep it at the forefront of your mind. And what I've noticed over the several semesters I've taught this course is that the people who get an early start on the project are the ones who get a good grade. And people who leave it to the last week, I mean, I'm not saying like the last minute or the last day, even leaving it to the last week and the project's just, it's not very good. Because there are things that you have to think through, and that mental effort takes time. So does the research. But you can't do this at the last minute. And so I encourage you to get an early start. I mean, remember, the topic of the project is money and your career and your life. And so I hope that these things are interesting to you. Now, if you've got questions, and I'm sure that you will along the way, feel free to contact me on Teams. And that includes if you want me to look over in advance how things are going with your spreadsheet or some of the assumptions that you've been making, feel free to let me know. All right, so Chase is mentioning he has no audio and the screen is black. He's left the session. Hopefully coming back in will fix that for him. Can the rest of you hear me and see the screen right now? All right.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. All right, so today we turn a new leaf. We are moving into chapter 7 of the book. So I should have put that on the screen there because I encourage you to read through the textbook, you know, with the corresponding material that we cover in lecture, also reading that book. That's a great way to be prepared for the exam, is have that additional point of view and additional information. So chapter 7 is where we're headed, and we're going to talk about rate of return analysis. Now, before we get into that, are there any questions related to the announcements? Okay. There is a distinct lack of food trucks in Huntington. We've got a couple. I think I've seen that there's a coffee food truck, and there used to be like a Mediterranean food truck, although I haven't seen it in a while. And I think maybe Steak and Shake also has a food truck. I've seen it parked on campus in the past, but we don't have as many as I wish we did. I've been to other cities that have just amazing food coming out of food trucks. Truck and Cheesy, that's right. I've actually been to their setup when they were over at Barbersville, you know, the Barbersville Farmer Market area. So there's one. But man, the best food trucks in America are in Portland, Oregon. Fantastic stuff there. They've got like food from the Republic of Georgia, food from Ethiopia, just stuff that you'd never encounter anyplace else. I like food trucks. So let's just use this as an illustration. Let's use the hypothetical of what if you were going to go into the food truck business and you were going to spend the typical amount for a food truck, and I looked it up to equip a food truck with all of the industrial kitchens and get it painted and configured and up and running, the average cost overall is about $85,000. So that's a lot. I mean, I guess it shouldn't make sense because people will often spend more than $50,000 just on a Ford F-150. So, you know, a little bit more than that for a big food truck full of equipment. I guess it makes sense. Now, what if you had a food truck and you were going to sell high-end hot dogs? And that would go over well here in Huntington, which is definitely hot dog central. And so here's an example of Disco Dogs, and one of the things on their menu, the Lucky Chucky. $8.50 for a single hot dog. Seems like a lot, I think, but it sounds pretty good. You know, it's more than just the hot dog on a stale bun. Looks like maybe what is that, like a Euro bun or something, like, you know, the Greek flatbread. Looks delicious. All right, so $85,000 for the food truck, and you're going to sell each hot dog for $8.50. So the question is, if, you know, that's the outflow and the inflow, how long is it going to take to pay off the food truck? You know, you're going to start thinking in terms of how many hot dogs you have to sell to pay the employees, to pay for natural gas for your heaters, to pay for the gasoline for the generator. So you just start thinking in terms of profits and expenses, but the equipment, the initial outlay, how long does it take for you to pay that off? So what we're going to do is go through a spreadsheet analysis, and I've emailed you a template file earlier today, maybe around a half hour ago. I emailed you an Excel file that we're going to use as the basis for today's in-class exercise. Now, what we'll do in working through that spreadsheet is calculate something that's called the unrecovered investment balance. Now, it may be that you borrow money to buy the food truck, or it might be that you use your own funds. Either way, at the beginning of this project's life, you have spent a lot of money. You spent $85,000, whether it's your money or the bank's money. Either way, you've made this big outlay of cash at the present, and so you haven't yet recovered profits to justify that expense. And so that's what we're calling the unrecovered investment balance, is just how much of that initial outlay has not yet been recovered in the form of sales that exceed costs. And so, of course, when you make a sale, you have to, you know, when you sell a hot dog for $8.50, some of that goes towards the meat and the cheese whiz and the onions and the bread. You know, so some of that goes towards the actual thing that you're giving the person, but then a lot of that $8.50 is covering other things. It's covering labor, it's covering fuel, it's covering the capital cost of the food truck itself. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the net revenue, which is the profits that you get from your sales. So in $8.50, the net revenue may only be $2 or $3. You know, so when you subtract out the cost of labor, and when you subtract out the insurance and the permits and the fees and the actual food itself, you know, the amount of that $8.50 that the person can put towards their original investment is going to be much smaller. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through calculations that you could perform to determine unrecovered investment balance. And as we do, we could, from the table, create a figure. Maybe a lot of you have used Excel in the past for making charts, more so than doing calculations or preparing tables. And so you maybe know Excel from charts, and we can make a chart that shows this unrecovered investment balance. Now look how it's a positive. It's above the line. And even though you had an initial outlay of cash that was an expense, you know, the food truck cost $85,000, and if we did a normal cash flow diagram, that would be an arrow down at time 0. We know that, but this is a new kind of figure. This new kind of figure, by definition, unrecovered investment balance means a debt or some of your own money that you spent but not yet got back in the form of profits. And so I just wanted to mention that although this is above the line, it represents that you're kind of, things aren't going great yet. You know, you haven't earned enough profit to justify what happened. Okay, so there's $85,000 is the initial investment, and then look how it goes up during the first year. So your unrecovered investment balance gets higher because in addition to just paying off the truck, we also want to earn a rate of return on top of that. And so there is an interest rate, I prime, that is compounding the unrecovered investment balance, so that at the end of the first year, you're in the hole more than $85,000 because you've got the $85,000, but then also remember the time value of money and a desired rate of return means that you're always having to compound amounts as you move forward through time. And so your unrecovered investment balance is bigger at the end of the first year, but then you have some profits that bring it down. So R means revenue, E means expense, and so your profits from the first year bring down the unrecovered investment balance. And so we go through this annual cycle each year of the whatever unrecovered investment balance remains at the beginning of a year, compounds and gets larger in amount until we account for the profits applicable to that year, and that brings down the unrecovered investment balance. And then after a certain number of years, it goes to zero. So here's the question. How many years does it take to get to zero at a certain interest rate that you desire, I prime? So that's what we're going to be kind of juggling back and forth. And we can do these problems with like what is the interest rate required to break even after a certain number of years, or it could be the reverse of that, where you know the interest rate and then you're asking how many years to get there. So sometimes I prime is the unknown, sometimes N is the unknown. Now this I prime we're going to call the internal rate of return. You're going to have a lot of different variables this semester that include the letter I. There's capital I, which means interest amount. There's lowercase I, that means interest rate. Now this is a special kind of interest rate. So I prime specifically means the internal rate of return, and so that is balance between the inflow and the outflows after a certain number of years. Remember the rocks balancing or the elephant on the Kevlar beach ball? So balance, the unknown interest rate that brings balance between the inflows and the outflows, that's what we're going to be solving for here in the internal rate of return. Now the internal part of this means that you're assuming the profits are reinvested into the project. And we'll talk more about that later. But we're going to solve for I today. And it's the interest rate that is to be determined in a lot of the problems on your homework and in the real world. You want to know what rate of return you're going to get, and you'll have to spend money in order to make money. And so let's take a look. We're going to assume you're getting $85,000 from the bank and that this is a 5-year loan. And the bank expects 4% annual interest. And so in this example, we're going to try and go through here and find out for this $85,000 initial balance, each year how much interest is going to apply based on the balance, how much it grows to, so during the course of the year how much the unrecovered investment balance goes up to because of that year's interest, the amount of the payment that's required, and then if you've ever bought a car or a house, you may already know that when you make a payment to the bank, oftentimes the coupon that you send in with the payment, or when you do it online, you can look it up. It tells you specifically how much of your payment is going towards interest and how much of it goes towards principal. And over the course of the loan, that actually shifts, so that early on you're paying a lot of interest, and towards the end of a loan you're paying more principal. It's kind of an interesting thing, and we'll get our first taste of that today. So you'll notice that the columns are numbered, okay? And then I've given you some formulas that tell you how to calculate each column. So if we go and look at the I think the in-class exercise form essentially just looks the same as what's just been on the screen there. Let me pull that up if I can. All right, here it is. Unrecovered investment balance. Yeah. So 85,000, 5 years, 4% annual interest. And then the student start file that I emailed you, hopefully you've received that by email. It looks like this. Same stuff. Just I didn't want you to have to bother typing in all of these things. I wanted for us to just jump straight into the data. Okay, so what we're going to do is I am going to pause for a moment, and what I'd like you to try and do is just start filling in this spreadsheet table. And I'll give you a hint that the first thing that we put in here is it's 85,000 as the starting unrecovered investment balance. But now all the rest of this you're going to have to figure out based on the formulas that are included in that template file. And if you don't have the template file, then you can just begin from scratch with a blank spreadsheet. But I'm going to pause for a second, stop talking so that you can focus and try and calculate basically the unrecovered balance at the end of each year. And you know you did it right if it goes down to 0 in the end. So the first thing is you have to do some of the question by hand. Like I'm suggesting that you should draw a cash flow diagram of both when you get the money and you're making the repayments. You don't yet know the repayment amount, and so you'll calculate the payment amount with this factor that I've provided for you. And then once you've done those first two things, then we switch over to the Excel part. All right, I'm going to pause. Feel free to type any questions you might have into the chat window. Just to make sure that you've got the payment amount correct and your cash flow diagram is right. All right, so today you get 85,000. So here is your inflow at time 0 of 85,000. And then from your perspective, you have to pay the bank a certain amount, 5 payments, the same amount each year, and we're going to calculate the value of that A using the factor. Okay, now I provided this factor to more decimals than you can find if you go to the back of your book. And the reason why is I wanted our value to be accurate to the nearest penny, so that when we put it into the spreadsheet, at the end it gets down to 0. If we had just used the factor that's in the book, then our payment amount wouldn't be exact to the penny, and then when we do it in the spreadsheet, it wouldn't have gone down exactly to 0 in the end. It would have been really close, but I wanted it to be perfect. All right, so what we have to do is pay the bank 5 payments of $19,093.30. Okay, so then here in our student start file, apply the column formulas for each one of those columns, and then after a couple more minutes, I'd like you to get a head start and think about it. And if you don't know, try something. The stakes couldn't be possibly lower. And we'll go through it together in just a moment. Oh, did I send you the one with the solution? Oh. Mitchell says his was already filled out. I have a version with the solution and a blank one, and I thought I sent you the blank one. Okay. Mitchell, that's so strange that yours was already filled out. Oh, yeah, on Blackboard. Okay. That's probably it. I probably posted the wrong one on Blackboard. I emailed you the blank one today, but I think that the one on Blackboard is I accidentally saved the file after last semester. All right, so Chad had a question about column 6. I mean, you can, Mitchell, you can just highlight all the answers and press delete and do it from scratch. You don't necessarily have to open the other one. All right. So column 6 is column 1 minus column 5 to get column 6. Okay, I'll give you just another moment or two, and then I'll start solving this and describing what I'm doing. Okay, now feel free to continue working. You don't necessarily have to stop as I talk through this, but I am going to begin working on the solution and explaining what I'm doing. Okay, so here for column 2, it says it's the interest rate multiplied by the amount in column 1. Okay, so it's going to be the interest rate, and I always want it to look there even when I drag the formula down through subsequent years. So I need to anchor it with the dollar signs. So F4 makes the anchoring. Okay, so that's the interest times the amount in column 1. So this is how much interest is earned in the first year. Now you'll notice, by the way, that we don't start with 0. A lot of our calculations in Excel have started at time 0, but here each row refers to a period rather than a specific instant in time. So this is a little bit different, and that's why it started at year 1. Year 1 is the first year starts at 0 and it goes through 1. So think of it as a period rather than an instant in time. Okay, so at the beginning of year, meaning at time 0, then the unrecovered investment balance is $85,000. And during that annual period, $3,400 of interest accumulates. So just before that payment is due, it's going to be the sum of those two things, and that's what the formula tells us down here for column 3. So it is the beginning year's balance and the interest that accumulated. So just before the payment is made, we owe $88,400. And so back to the illustration, we're at this point that we've just calculated the initial balance plus the interest that accumulated. And now we're going to give the bank our payment amount. And so let's type in what we had calculated earlier by hand was $19,093.30. So $19,093.30. And I even want it to show those 30 cents. So I'm going to increase the decimal. Across the ribbon at the top here, you click on Home and then increase currency number of decimal places. And now I can see that I do, in fact, even if I hadn't shown it, it would still include them as it does the calculations. But since it's there, I'll leave it there. Okay. So this is how much you give the bank, and that is how much is going towards interest. And so the rest of it is going towards principal. Remember that when you give the bank money, they get to keep some of it, and then some of it, they get to keep some of it as their profit, and then some of it goes towards paying off the principal of your loan. And so here, column 5 says that the amount you give the bank minus the interest amount is the fraction of the payment that goes towards the principal. So equals this minus that. So of the 19,000, about 15,000 goes towards principal, 3,400 goes towards interest. And so then your unrecovered investment balance is going to be the original 85,000 minus how much of it went towards principal. Okay, so 69,307 is the amount of the unrecovered investment balance after that year's profits bring it down. So then the second year starts at the end of the first year and goes through the end of the second year. So this amount, which we've just looked at from the context of year 1, is now the beginning of the second year. So that is why here on the spreadsheet, we're going to say that column 1 is 6 from the previous year. So it's just the same amount as we calculated there. Because this is saying end of the first year, and this is saying beginning of the second year. It's the same time. It's the same instant in time. And so the amount is the same. Okay? Now, we don't have to type any more formulas, I don't think. We can just drag down from the previous year. So you can drag down this one. And the interest is less because the unrecovered principal balance is less. And so then the loan goes up because it's the balance of the loan plus the interest that accumulated. But we're giving the bank the same amount every year. So your payment amount stays constant. And I'm just going to drag this one down through all of them because I want to make sure that that stays the same amount during each of the 5 years. All the rest of the values are going to be different though. So how much of it goes towards principal is higher because less of the 19,000 is going towards interest. You know, since your balance is lower, the bank gets to keep less of that as interest and more of it goes towards the principal. And so then the unrecovered investment balance, it's going to be the same formula as before. You just drag it down. So we can do that with the next row. And I wonder if I can do all of them at once or whether that's going to screw up column 4. Let's just see if we can do it all. Yeah. All right, so it goes to 0. Now that's exactly what we were expecting to see, is that we were solving for basically what does this figure look like when we know we want to pay off the truck in 5 years and we pay 4% interest. Yours went to 3 cents. Let's see, maybe I need to show mine more. Oh, all right, so the reason why that is that we've got, you can't pay like fractions of a penny. We've got 5 years, and so that's effectively 0. Maybe what we would do is in the last year you'd give the bank $19,093.33, and then that would get you down to 0. You'd pay a little extra in the final year, but it was effectively 0 to begin with. Okay, so this same method is used in order to find out what's called the payoff time, or we can call it a break-even analysis. Like if you have an interest rate and you know how much inflow you're going to get each year, then you could solve for the unknown n. In this problem, what we were doing is we started by calculating what would be the repayment amount that's due to the bank in order to bring equilibrium after 5 years. So We'll come back to this and look at the same procedure from different angles later in the semester, but for now, what you need to do is just be aware of the meaning of this phrase, unrecovered investment balance. All right. So are there any questions on what we did for today's in-class exercise? You know, for once, I think we're going to finish a little bit early. That's all I have for you today. So as a reminder, the things that you've got on your plate right now are the annual worth assignment analysis, annual worth analysis assignment due Monday before noon. And then if you haven't already, read over the project description. I know I already talked about it, but you really need to read the description in its entirety, and you may have questions, and if you do, let me know. All right, that's it for today, everybody. Take care. Hope you have a good weekend.